The imminent clash, scheduled for February 1943, marked the beginning of the largest tank battle in history. With Hitler's authorization, German Field Marshal Manstein orchestrated a counteroffensive along the southern front. On February 21st, the 4th Panzer Army spearheaded the attack, swiftly recapturing Kharkov and Belgorod. In retaliation, the Red Army retreated to Kursk, and military operation ceased due to the onset of the spring mud season, known as Rasputitsa, which hindered the mobility of both armor and infantry. Hitler's initiation of Operation Citadel on April 15th aimed to encircle 5 Soviet armies entrenched in the Kursk region from both northern and southern fronts. General Model's 9th Army was assigned to advance from the north to rendezvous with the 4th Panzer Army on their path, an army detachment Kempf, commanded by Werner Kempf, advancing from the south. Their coverance east of Kursk was intended to envelop the defending Red Army. However, significant disagreement arose within the German military hierarchy and Hitler himself regarding the effectiveness of Operation Citadel. While some advocated for its abandonment in favor of strategic defense, preferring to exploit weaker sections of the Soviet front through counterattacks, aligned with the Germany's exercise in mobile tank warfare. Some argued that Operation Citadel needed prompt execution due to intelligence suggestion, Soviet efforts in fortified defensive positions around Kursk. Despite the original plan to begin the offensive in May, Hitler chose to postpone it until the arrival of new tanks at the front. As a result, the offensive kicked off 2 months after than initially planned. Soviet intelligence had indicated the German army preparation for a significant offensive. Kharkov convinced Stalin to await the German offensive rather than launching a preemptive strike. His strategy aimed to wear down the Germans, neutralize as many tanks as possible, and seize the first opportunity for a decisive counteroffensive. Consequently, the Soviet initiated the construction of defensive works, fortifications, minefields, and anti-tank barriers. The Vranich front, under the command of Nikolai Batutin, was assigned to defend the southern sector of Kursk salient, while the northern sector fell under the responsibility of the Central Front, led by Konstantin Rokossovsky. Moreover, the Steppe Front, commanded by Ivan Konev, remained in reserve. To counter the imminent German offensive, the Soviets utilized partisan tactics behind enemy lines to disturb supply lines and communications, causing significant setbacks for the German forces. Partisans successfully sabotaged 298 locomotives, 1,222 railway wagons, and 44 bridges, contributing to the delay of the German offensive. In total, the Germans could muster up to 780,000 troops and approximately 3,000 tanks for the Kursk offensive, while the Red Army boasted a force of up to 2 million soldiers and over 5,000 tanks, giving them a significant manpower and armor advantage. Preliminary engagements began on July 4, 1943, as German infantry launched an offensive in the southern sector, breaching the initial line of Soviet defenses. Subsequently, the Panzer Grenadier Division, Gross Deutschland, initiated a panzer assault, successfully capturing Bitorbo, a village in Gatosk, despite encountering fierce Soviet resistance and navigating through minefields. Notably, 36 panzers were immobilized by mines in a single incident. On the left flank of the assault, Krust, Iceland, secured Mykolaiv to the left and Tehuk-Thonoa to the right, thereby creating a breach in the Soviets' first line of defense. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Theater, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps achieved a breakthrough of the initial defensive line. Nevertheless, staunched resistance from the Red Army, coupled with the 3rd SS Division failure to coordinate this advance, with the rest of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps prevented further progress into the 2nd defensive line. This vulnerability exposed the right flank of the offensive to Soviet counterattacks. Despite some success, parts of Army Detachment Kempf faced formidable challenges, crossing the river Donets and encountered resilient Soviet opposition, fortified structures, and difficult terrain, hindering their advancement toward the 2nd line of Soviet defenses. Turning to the northern sector, the 47th Panzer Corps initiated its advance on July 5th. However, progress was hampered by obstacles including the Red Army's 5th Rifle Division, minefields, and formidable fortifications. Intelligence gleaned from a prisoner of war identified a weakness in Soviet defenses, prompting the deployment of German Tiger tanks to exploit this vulnerability. In response, the Soviets dispatched 90 T-34 tanks to counter the Tigers. After a 3-hour clash, the Soviets suffered the loss of 40 tanks, while the Germans lost 7. Nonetheless, this delay allowed the Soviets to reinforce their defenses at the weak point. The tenacious resistance from the Soviets, along with their robust fortifications, limited the German advance to a mere 10 kilometers. On July 6, the battlefield witnessed intense engagements. Initially, the Soviet 16th Tank Corps launched a counteroffensive against Wehrmacht's 550 tanks battalion, but were compelled to retreat after losing 69 tanks. German efforts to breach Soviet defenses in Aflavaka and Fort Neri were fiercely rebuffed. Over the following 3 days, German forces persisted in assaulting strategically vital Orlovodka and Fort Neri, with the Soviets bolstering their defenses in these areas. By July 10th, after arduous house-to-house combat, the Germans gained control of much of Neri, yet they failed to penetrate the fortified positions in Aklawaha. Despite heavy losses inflicted on the Soviets, the German advance prompted the reinforcement of the steppe front's reserve forces to counter the XLVII Panzer Corps, posing a significant threat to breach the unguarded Soviet rear. The Soviet army directed the 5th Guards, 2nd Guards, and 2nd and 10th Tank Corps towards Korata, located 40 kilometers southeast of Prokhorovka, to confront the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Regrettably, the Soviet counteroffensive on July 8th faltered due to inadequate coordinations, resulting in the destruction of 50 Soviet tanks by the Luftwaffe, an unpredicted event where an entire tank formation succumbed to airstrikes alone. While this counteroffensive momentarily halted the German momentum, by July 11th, Army Detachment Kempf achieved a breakthrough, and the 2nd SS Panzer Corps received orders to advance toward Prokhorovka. A German victory in this sector posed a significant risk of encircling the Soviet forces defending Kursk. During the fierce clash at Prokhorovka, the German forces assembled the 294 tanks, whereas the Soviets showcased their superior might with 616 tanks at their disposal. On the 12th of July, around 500 tanks and self-propelled guns from the Soviet 5th Guards tank army launched a ferocious assault on the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. The initial wave comprised 430 units, with the remaining 70 following closely behind, all aiming to dislodge the entrenched position of the thwarted division, provoking a swift response from the 1st SS Panzer Regiment. Opposing the Soviet onslaught were primarily tanks from the 31st and 32nd Tank Brigades of the 29th Tank Corps, setting the stage for a brutal tank battle, utilizing a strategy of swift approach and rapid firing. Soviet tank commander Rotmistrov distributed the coordination and accuracy of the German tanks. After 3 grueling hours, the 1st SS Panzer Regiment claimed to have halted the advance, reporting the destruction of 62 Soviet tanks. Yet, Later in the day, units from the 31st Tank Brigade and the 53 Motorized Brigade managed to breach the defenses, posing a significant threat to Leby's standard, communication, lines, and operational integrity. In response, 4 Tiger tanks engaged the Soviet 181st Tank Brigade, protecting the left flank of the Liebe standard. Despite inflicting heavy losses on the Soviets, the Tiger tanks emerged unscathed. Subsequently, the Soviet 117th Assault Brigade entered the fray, targeting the embattled 1st SS Panzer Regiment. Despite losing their commander and around 30 tanks, the 170th Tank Brigade succeeded in driving back the German forces and advancing toward the position of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion. Eventually, the combined efforts of the 117th and 118th 1st Tank Brigade breached the German defensive line, only to be repelled and forced to retreat toward the village of Rivka. As the night fell, the Liberty Standard withdrew from the OXJ Brisky state from under relentless Soviet assault. The Battle of Prokhorovka witnessed substantial losses for the Soviets, with estimates ranging from 330 to 650 tanks either permanently or temporarily damaged, while the Germans suffered between 60 to 80 tank losses. This battle marked the culmination of the largest tank engagement in military history, with stark disparities and casualties between the opposing forces. Despite sustaining heavy losses, the Soviets successfully thwarted the German advance, depleting their resources and setting the stage for a formidable counteroffensive. Following the Battle of Prokhovka and the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Citadel was abandoned by the Germans, who shifted to defensive positions north of Kursk. On July 12th, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov, forcing the retreat of German army groups centered against assaults from the Bryansk front and Western front. Subsequently, Operation Rumyantsev, led by the Varnish front and Steppe front, aimed to annihilate the 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Camp, thereby isolating the southern flank of Army Group South. Belgorod was liberated on August 5th, followed by Kharkov on August 23rd. The Battle of Kursk underscored the limitations of the Wehrmacht's offensive capabilities on the Eastern Front, despite an initially promising German advance. The sheer manpower and bargaining military-industrial complex of the Soviets proved insurmountable for the German forces. Despite sustaining significant losses, the Red Army managed to reclaim and liberate occupied territories. Increasing challenges in Italy prompted Hitler to further deplete his Eastern Front forces, redirecting them to the Western Front. The pressure continued to intensify.